Don't have anyone else in the waiting room. So let's get started. Thanks to all of you for whom this is the second work group today. You guys are tired already. What we're going to talk about today, and I'm not convinced this one's going to take a full 90 minutes, but what I want to talk about are standard operating procedures. Now, standard operating procedures like regulations and statutes may be things only I get excited about. This is one of the many nerdly parts of me. But what I would like to talk about are, from a very high level, the kind of information, sort of technical information that you think should be provided to those who are working on enforcement and investigation and identification of unsafe care. So that could mean things to look for, and these could be used by folks who are licensing specialists. All right, we'll have a few more people join. So for the standard operating procedures that I'd like to discuss today, I would like some high-level information that you would like folks who are enforcing or investigating or looking into unsafe care, what they should have, right? So those could be sort of process related, or that could be more substance. Now, right now, it's my understanding that licensing specialists are the folks who are investigating and enforcing. In the future, that could be a separate division or department. So let's sort of look at it from all angles. So I think maybe the most efficient way to do this would be sort of first focus on information that we should include in some sort of standard operating procedure for identification, and then investigation, and then enforcement. So break it down into 3 categories, and it may be that our discussion is more organic than that, but let's think about those 3 categories as we kind of move forward. So the first work group that we visited with this morning was incredibly interactive. It was great. Some comments and conversations that felt kind of disruptive, and sort of ways that we can effect change in the current system. And there'll be another work group that talks specifically about regulations and statutes. So for me, this is more kind of a soft boots on the ground information, right? So those are the folks. And again, I would welcome input from folks in the department who have done, past or present, who have done investigations or have worked to identify unsafe care in the past, as well as folks who have experienced or had conversations with other folks who have been investigated or things like that. Is that clear as mud? Could we have, is there someone from the department who could sort of give a 2-minute summary of sort of where standard operating procedures, and I'm just using that phrase sort of as a general guideline, as something that's not specifically a regulation or not specifically a statute, sort of a general process. Could someone talk about sort of this is what a standard operating procedure, how we use them or what they look like?
Sure. I'm happy to do that, Laura.
Thank you, Karen. Oh, before you get started, also if folks could put sort of their names and their organization in the chat so we have kind of confirmation about who we all are, that would be great. And thank you, Karen. I appreciate you jumping in.
Yeah, no problem. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Karen Rosa, Director of Child Care Licensing for the Office of Early Childhood. And kind of just a general overview of our SOPs for unlicensed complaints and surveillance. What is recorded in those SOPs are like, it outlines when licensing staff should make visits based on complaints we received. it outlines investigation protocol, like assessing the numbers and ages of children to determine if illegal care is occurring or if it's an exempt unlicensed care provider. And then it establishes protocols for when a staff member should serve cease and desist orders. It outlines providing information to the program that we're investigating on obtaining childcare license. It also defines when our licensing staff have to do follow-up investigations or surveillance based on what was observed. And then also it outlines for our staff when they submit a case for adverse licensing action, that would be an injunction or fines in an unlicensed situation. And then for surveillance, generally our standard operating procedure outlines information that's to be gathered during surveillance. It talks about documenting vehicles and descriptions of adult and children seen being picked up and dropped off, and witness information if that's applicable. Also, making sure that they gather and keep any cease and desist letters that are given during surveillance. It will outline timeframes for surveillance, when it should be conducted and when they have to continue. And then also like where and how to conduct surveillance. So things like, informing them they shouldn't park on private property, and how to respond if someone approaches your vehicle while you're doing surveillance, what licensing staff should have with them during surveillance, and then how to respond if a situation becomes escalated while they're doing surveillance. So that's kind of just a general overview of both of what those SOP kind of outline.
Great, thank you so much, Karen. That's a lot of info at once. And so I appreciate sort of the high level overview. That's great. So what I would like to do is kind of go through the process, starting with identification, then investigation, maybe enforcement, and then sort of what happens afterwards. I imagine there'll be some questions about how the department coordinates with other agencies. I think it's important to note, and I think Mark, you made this point at an earlier work group or a meeting, that licensing does not, for example, investigate whether or not there's child abuse or neglect, right? That's done by the counties or by DHS. So we're just talking now about whether someone in a particular situation is providing care that is allowed or not allowed, right? And allowed being licensed care, and then also exempt family and neighbor care. And I imagine one of the things we could try and dig into a bit is how we can go through this process of identifying unsafe care while still respecting the absolutely allowable, and for some families, great option, friends, family, and neighbor care, like how we can respect those folks. Let's start with identification. What kinds of information do you folks as stakeholders in this process, what would you like to see included in kind of an identification of the identification phase, right? In the finding folks who are doing things that is unsafe or impermissible. And I guess one question we could do is we may have to break that out into two things, because certainly unsafe care can happen in licensed care. There are individuals who are licensed but still make poor choices and violate regulations. I'm not sure that we need to go too far into that today, but we certainly could. So let's start right now with sort of identification of unsafe care, period. What would you like to see in those standard operating procedures? Couple more folks. who are being admitted. So again, the audience at present for standard operating procedures are going to be the folks who are going to enforce. So CDHS folks, what information would you like to see them look for in an attempt to identify whether care is unsafe or safe? All right, in the chat, we have child-adult ratios, and then more frequent and unannounced visits. What kind of, for folks who have experienced interaction with care that is unsafe, what would feel to you like a frequent enough visit? Okay, someone says more than 3 days of observation.
Laura, is it okay if I just dispel that myth that we only do 3 days of surveillance for unlicensed care? I think
Sure.
people get confused about that. We actually will conduct as much surveillance as necessary to build our case for an injunction or fine. Like, there's no limit on the amount of surveillance. I think where people get confused with the 3 days, in the past, it's been, and this is in the past, it's been where to establish a pattern of care is occurring in order to take it to court to prove to a judge that we've established illegal unlicensed care. We've done at least needing 3 consecutive days of them providing illegal unlicensed care. So that's, but we can and do actually continue surveillance and conduct as much surveillance. We are definitely not limited to 3 days of surveillance at all. I just wanted, because that's come
That's
up.
helpful. No, that's helpful. And so it looks like Mark just made a point that you all work because the mechanism that you have, as I understand it, to end unsafe, non-exempt, non-licensed care would be a cease and desist letter and then an injunction through the Attorney General's office. Is that right? Sort of, so because that's your path, Mark is making the point that you all work closely with the Office of the Attorney General to determine the amount of surveillance necessary to achieve that, if you have to go that far. Is that right? Okay, I see nods from Mark and Karen. Thank you. So is there, before we leave surveillance, is there, for those of you who may have observed unsafe and unlicensed care sort of in the wild, is there a type of surveillance that you think is useful, different times of day, or any input on that? So we're talking both about kind of the frequency of surveillance and also the type. Is there a particular kind that you all have seen or you believe would be more effective than what's currently done, or what you see now that is being done that you like? Okay, so am I to take that from the folks who are currently, we typically conduct surveillance during common drop-off and pickup times. Okay, that's useful. So current surveillance is focusing on sort of the bringing of the kiddos and the picking up of the kiddos. Are there other types of surveillance, sort of for community walks, other different times of day, or is that just so random that it's inefficient?
Yeah, I think, from the licensing perspective, we try to do it the times that are common, that we're going to be able to actually document parent pickup and drop off, and
Okay.
really, like Krista had said, it's really, during pickup and drop off time. So depending on the type of program that we're surveilling,
Sure.
that can drive what timeframes we typically try to do that surveillance.
Okay, great. What
Yeah,
about,
so much of our surveillance is really dependent on the information that we receive when we're being informed that the unlicensed care is taking place. So if the reporting party can give us as much detail as possible on when they're seeing children arrive and leave, or if they have concerns about them, leaving in the middle of the day to do field trips, whatever information we take in the report, we then use to decide what form of surveillance will be probably the most successful. So there really is not a cookie cutter surveillance system. It really is going to depend on how much information we have and what we feel would be like the smartest route to take with surveillance to give us the most information and documentation.
okay, that's very helpful. I don't know if anyone would be comfortable answering this question, but particularly for other providers or other community members, if you have ever tried to report care that was of concern to you, how did you find that process? Just sort of piggybacking on Christina's observation that that the department needs certain kinds of information. Have you ever tried to report and then had sort of an issue? I'm thinking about the actual process, right? Like were you asked particular questions or not asked questions, so you knew how to be helpful?
I can answer that one because I've actually reported a couple times on unlicensed care in my own neighborhood.
Great, thank you.
And the one time I reported this gal 3 different times for unlicensed care. The one time I went through the police department because she had left children unattended in a vehicle. So I called them first and the fire department. When the police department got there, I was told that I would have to inform licensing. At that time, I didn't know this gal's name, address, or anything. All I knew was plate number. So for me, it was really hard to report that because I didn't have that information, nor were they going to give me that information. So I think when a person knows and you call like the police department, you say, hey, this lady left children unattended in a vehicle, walked into a school, and there was 3 kids and one not in a car seat jumping around in that vehicle. And to me, that's unsafe care. I had seen her picking up numerous children at school before, so I knew she was doing illegal care. I just didn't know where. So to me, the police department should be helping to report that too, when you know that that's going on. When I finally did get an address, because one day I followed her because that was the only way I could report her is I had to have an address. So I followed her after school, followed her where she was at, got an address, called it in. They said they came out and did surveillance because I found that out on the second time I called to report again, but then this person took to Facebook to bash licensing. I mean, she took a picture of the rep and put it all over Facebook on different pages, babysitting sites and stuff like that of this rep. I mean, and nothing was ever really done with her. I mean, she wasn't closed down.
That raises an interesting question for me. Are there places, I have not gone out and done any sort of research in social media to see where folks advertise or where there might be suggestions, either of people saying, hey, I am unlicensed, come work here, or people just putting out ad requests or offers to provide service.
Oh, it's all over Facebook. I mean, you could type in babysitting and childcare on Facebook, and you will find groups after groups that this is per counties. I mean, you'll find them per subdivisions. They're all over. That's like Carrie talked about. Wish there was a way to report these people who are on Facebook, and they'll say they're not licensed. Craigslist is another good one. They go to Craigslist. I mean, you'll see them all over social media advertising, and as soon as you can try to get information, either they'll block you because they found out your license, or you're deleted off the group because they found out your license, especially if you've reported somebody. But it's all over social media.
So it looks like the social media sites that folks are mentioning in the chat are Facebook, Craigslist, care.com, Nextdoor. Any others? I'm trying to think of the other sort of just neighborhood apps. Is there, go ahead.
I don't know if it's helpful or not, but I can tell you, one of our former directors of the division actually tried on Craigslist to have a posting from the licensing department to say, this is what's required, please check your childcare, and was denied access because the one thing is we can't not identify ourselves or who we are, so um, we can't like go undercover and uh, we have to, if we're contacting somebody, we have to identify ourselves. And so we had a former division director that actually wanted them to post something, so that families looking at this understood, who was required to be licensed and who was not. And we were denied ability.
So that could provide an interesting, I'll see someone's talking about HOA Facebook pages. That's a great thought. It sounds like maybe there's an opportunity for maybe some sort of partnership with some of these social media sites to see if we might be able to sort of crack through that, Karen, is what I'm seeing. And that would be very consistent with the conversation we had this morning at 8:30 about where folks get their information, where families get their information, where providers get their information, and how we can deliver this to start the conversation in order to get to the education piece, right? So acknowledging there's sort of the first, we have the ability to sort of info drop on people, but to get beyond that to education about sort of how folks can pick care, that might be an opportunity. I don't know what that would be involved in that, or if people will be willing, but it sounds like that might be an interesting thing to focus on. What about, is there any sort of repository of information about folks who might be providing unsafe care that may or may not be linked to an address? So if people, one of the questions in the, Carrie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say really quick, I know I talked to Karen in the past about Craigslist kicking you off.
Yeah.
I've been able to post as a county association, and I try to do a lot of informational stuff, but also with Nextdoor, they do allow officials to post in certain sections. I know our police department, our city government, they will post just announcements. So maybe that is an avenue that OEC could take through Nextdoor, is to somehow become an official partner with them to post that information.
Thank you, Carrie. I like that suggestion. I think it could be a good way. It may not be in the same place on Craigslist or Nextdoor, so it may not, but at least it's there. If I'm searching, it would come up in my search. So that could be a great option. Incentivize those that are fearful of government and regulatory authority. We have had a number of comments about folks who are concerned or don't feel safe interacting with government for whatever reason, whether it's, because of past experiences or, uncertain or vulnerable immigration status or any of the other things. I don't understand the incentivize though. I don't know if Courtney would be willing to tell me what it might make them feel comfortable, but I want to make sure we don't miss something in that comment if you're willing to share more.
I would just maybe approach it kind of similar to the way that Tri-County is approaching like vaccines, especially if we're trying to make vaccines more equitable. So we're approaching those, communities of color and those. So maybe incentivizing having a spokesperson for those communities to incentivize them that you don't have to be fearful being a person of color or what have you, that you can do this safely.
Thank you. That's perfect. That's exactly what I needed. Thank you. Because we certainly do want folks to feel safe asking the questions. And it would seem to me that part of that safety would be letting folks know there are ways to provide friends and family care, don't involve licensure. So this is the fact that you're doing something now doesn't necessarily mean that there's a concern. Is there a use, or a repository of information if folks see something on Craigslist or Facebook and could take a screenshot of something even though they don't have, there's no address posted on Facebook. Is that something that could be of use to the department? I'm thinking about, sort of citizen action groups in general, right? I mean, if folks want to submit information that they see, is that kind of a lead useful to the department, or is it really not useful unless there is an address?
Yeah, right now our mechanism to do, unlicensed complaint and surveillance would be, we'd have to have an address. We don't necessarily have to have a name because we take, unknown names for sure, but right now we'd have to have an address because we don't, I mean, that doesn't mean that can't change, but right now we don't
Sure.
have a mechanism to go track down to try to find this individual just from a post on Facebook or a text or anything like that.
Got
So
it.
currently we have to have the address.
Okay, so maybe one suggestion could be investigate whether there's a way to catalog or collect that information in the event that, something becomes available in the future, but it's not something that can be acted upon right now. I see a comment in the chat saying that because there's admin folks who monitor, and particularly after, I imagine, Facebook has been making decisions about what kind of content can be posted, if there's a way to educate those folks about things that are useful or not, or if there's some sort of way for you could have something on a social media account that indicated that this particular provider had been vetted at some point. I can't imagine that. I don't know, there could be an interesting thing to, if the different websites have processes to show that a school or a home was safe.
Yeah, my name's Chelsea. I put that in the
Yeah.
chat, and I just think, if there was a way to prove that you did have a license before you're able to advertise, or some process that these different media accounts have to follow to ensure they're not advertising things that are unsafe or not meeting licensing requirements.
Or exempt. I mean, there could be an opportunity there to interact with social media platforms.
We, this is Mark. When I was the program director for the Electrical and Plumbing Board within the Divisions of Professions and Occupations, which is within the Department of Regulatory Agencies, we actually had this issue with electricians and plumbers advertising unlicensed practice on Craigslist and Facebook. And it's dependent on statutes, so that might be a good segue into an upcoming work group, because the term electrical is a protected term. And so we were able to issue cease letters specific to those ads on Facebook or Craigslist. And this might be an opportunity too for, the new department that's being created. Is Divisions and Professions and Occupations actually had what was created about probably 12 years ago, Office of Investigations, which if we didn't have an address and whatnot, we would give those complaints to the Office of Investigations individuals who would do their own undercover work, to call them to see if they do electrical work, plumbing work, and then of course issue a cease letter that way as well. I know there's this kind of variables in statutes, what we can and can't do, but again, that's what this work group's about, and the upcoming one later today too. But we found that especially during hard economic times, we found there's a lot of Craigslist and Facebook ads with unlicensed folks trying to seek electrical and plumbing work in. So we got after those a lot. So that's a possibility too, where we might be able to issue some of those, depending on what's legally allowed.
Thank you, Mark. That's helpful. I think it's helpful.
There's a lot of processes and procedures we could already pull from DPO, Division of Professions and Occupations, kind of work smarter, not harder, if we wanted to look more into that.
I think that's helpful to think about what other divisions, and certainly there are different circumstances where you have exemptions and things like that, but that could be a great place to start. Question, what happens to individuals who advertise that they are licensed when they are not in fact licensed? In some cases, they qualify as exempt, but in other times they're not exempt. Are there consequences to advertising or falsely claiming that you're licensed? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anyone else does.
Again, that's the statute change too. Again, like electrical and plumbing was different, where it was illegal to advertise you were licensed even if you weren't actually practicing. And so we could issue a cease and desist letter for ads like that.
And so that would
sure
be,
the
so that would be sort of a cease and desist letter, and then either an injunction through the administrative regs, or you could declare it a misdemeanor to lie about your status, you know, something like that if we decided.
Yeah, the statute support that you could issue a cease letter if you just advertised to be that you're licensed, if in fact you're not licensed, even if you're not practicing yet.
Who should someone, question in the chat, who do we report these individuals to? Currently, where's the place that folks would deliver that information if they find it?
I don't know the answer to that, Laura.
Okay.
We don't, I mean, we can't investigate that currently. You know, it's not in our statutes. It's something that we can, obviously, if they're providing care that requires a license and don't have a license, then we can pursue that avenue, but actually like that they're advertising their license when they're not, we don't have a mechanism for that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, I think to piggyback off of what Mark said, we don't really have a lot of the ability to prevent postings on Facebook. We don't have the ability to prevent their advertising or, you know, put it on their HOA page. We don't have any sort of system in place to prevent those types of postings. I mean, trying to control what is posted on social media is pretty impossible. However, if we had the ability to have the manpower and the authority to monitor that, then I think we could get somewhere. If we have someone specifically dedicated to monitoring social media based on key phrases or keywords, and could go through those postings and then do that follow-up investigation to get us the information that we need, like the address and the location, and then we can proceed with, you know, our serving the cease and desist letters. I don't think that we can put as much focus on preventing the postings as we can put more focus on monitoring those postings and then doing investigations based on that.
I appreciate that distinction. I think that's an important distinction of the bandwidth to prevent care that is happening that requires a license versus going out there and looking at sort of language. I appreciate that distinction. Question in the chat, is there a parent toolkit to educate families on the importance of safe care and what it means to be licensed? This may originally force folks who are providing care that requires a license to become licensed if parents are demanding. So this is something we talked about a little bit this morning, sort of the market demand idea, meaning if the market demands it, that it might happen. Sometimes one of the points raised this morning was that that can be kind of a middle class view of the world, because that's assuming that folks are acting based on market demands as opposed to just sort of their own personal crisis where they need care, and so they need to, you know, sometimes you leave your kid with the person who can take your kid when you have to go to work, or else you're going to be evicted. So that sort of model, but I like that as an idea. It certainly resonates with me as a human. Where can anyone put into the chat sort of links to where I know there are OEC resources that specifically provide parents with some sort of questions to ask? If we can find those, if not, we can certainly circulate them at the regular meeting on July 1st. We can share it then. I see comments. I'd love to see more information given to parents at the hospitals from their pediatricians That's a great point, Christina. One of the things we discussed this morning were sort of all the different areas where and trusted advisors with whom we could communicate about this issue. And thank you, Karen. So here's the Codifying Quality Care from Colorado Shines. Thank you. And we've talked about hospitals and OBs. I know Kelsey Matthew spoke a bit to that about, sort of the opportunity with pediatricians and OBs, at your second month, how you could obtain information, hospitals, libraries, birth centers, doulas, and then the mass communication, sort of a number of different options. So we hope to roll out some updates about that at the meeting on July 1st. Alma, I see you have your hand raised.
I was just going to second that. I think, parents, when they leave the hospital, no matter how many kids they've had, I've been through 4 births with my daughter, and they have to watch the safe sleep video every single time, and they have to get the car seat checked to make sure they're buckling and they buckled it in the car right. They buckled the child in the car right, and they give them this whole packet out. I don't see why OEC couldn't start partnering with hospitals and putting a brochure in there of, if you're looking for childcare, these are the questions you should ask. Do they have a license? And just go down that checklist. I know they already have sort of a checklist of what parents should ask. So why not partner with hospitals and get it put there in that packet when they have a brand new baby?
Yeah, hospitals are great sort of inroad, and we've definitely been visiting about that. And I think that's a great idea. We've been talking about making sure that those resources are digital as well as in paper form, so that way the hospital can print things out. So it's not all, state funds that are going to that. We've also had some great input from the councils about how to make sure that that information is not a, hi, here's how you get care in Denver sort of resource, because, we want to make sure we're providing information that serves other areas as well. And again, the conversations with at the OB level, if folks are receiving prenatal care, and other resources for people to get folks when, baby's in belly, so that they can get on lists if that's something that's important, or try and investigate that in a way that helps them early on in their baby's life, as opposed to coming home with the baby and then saying, well, what now? And then discovering that maybe that care is difficult to get because of time, right? It's always sort of a suburban mom joke about how, suburban moms are putting their kids on college lists when they're in utero. And maybe we don't have to go that far, but an awareness of the timing and making sure that that folks have considered those options at a time when they're very overwhelmed. For many people, those new days of pregnancy are a time of a lot of feelings. So it's good to make sure that we're supporting folks in whatever avenue makes sense. Or have something that hospitals and offices can post on their websites for patients. Yep, if folks are receiving prenatal care from an OB or from some provider or hospital, and they have access to that. One of the things we were talking about this morning was how some folks don't have reliable access to the internet or computers. So I think thinking about human beings is useful, and I think we can kind of flip that as far as in the investigation or standard operating procedure phase. If folks are getting information from a non-traditional source, and I don't know what non-traditional means in this context, not a bus or a park bench, or print media or provider, or pardon me, their physician, how can we intercept that and make sure they're getting the information that they need about safe care? And that could be an inroad for investigation as well, if we had the opportunity to do some additional investigation. Where are you all seeing folks obtain their information about finding care? Because those could be opportunities for investigation.
Do you mean, where are they getting information about licensed care, or where do we think they get information about unlicensed care?
I would say about licensed, unlicensed, exempt, and unlicensed, non-exempt care?
I would say majority of the time with unlicensed care, we run into a lot of families that get recommendations just from friends, from family members, from
Friends and
neighbors.
family.
You know, they go see this lady down the street because that's who their sister-in-law took her kids to, or her neighbor, or her coworker. A lot of that is word of mouth, I think, frequently. If they are looking for licensed care, then most of the time those parents have at least a small idea to look on Colorado Shines because they've seen advertising or they've heard about it from other people who do utilize licensed care. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways that they would find out about it. But I do think a lot of times when we find unlicensed providers, a lot of the parents that utilize them are friends or coworkers, or they have some sort of connection somehow, so they all use the same provider.
Okay,
Not all the time, but frequently.
sure, frequently. So it's personal referrals, and then also I see Facebook and Nextdoor. Sorry, just checking the chat. Okay, yeah, we can talk about Elliesville in a second. That's a good idea. Because I want to, if someone is looking for licensed care, then they may have the knowledge of going on Colorado Shines and picking it. If someone picks unlicensed care, I think there's an opportunity for education there about unlicensed and exempt and safe care versus unlicensed and unsafe care. So I know when we talk, sometimes it's easy to put things into buckets, but it would be helpful, I think, if we can identify how people get information about those two categories. I don't know if someone, maybe Amber or someone else who provides in-home care, because that's another category too, right? You can have licensed in-home care versus in-home exempt and in-home non-exempt. So helping folks understand that those are different categories of care and the different risks associated with them. As there's risk anytime you leave a child, right? Licensed or unlicensed. So how folks can educate themselves about those different categories. I don't know if folks have any information about that.
So we've been trying to work on that in just getting providers to understand the difference. Because I don't think even providers, I don't think understand that there is an exempt care as well. I don't know if that really answers your question. It was kind of loud over here, so I couldn't
That's
hear the
okay.
whole
I was
thing.
rambling. I get lost in my own head. It makes perfect sense to me in my own head. No, that's helpful. So making sure that providers themselves understand the difference, because you could have providers who would tell you this is fine and what's happening is perfectly okay in my house. I treat your kids like my own. And they may understand that they're being misleading, or they're providing straight up untruthful information, or they may not. They may see this as an opportunity for them to stay home and spend time with their own children and love on other kids and not understand that what they're doing.
Hey, Laura, I think that's a really good point, that that safe care for children is safe care for children, regardless if you're in exempt care, if you're in licensed care, or qualified exempt care, like regardless of where the child is, even if you're taken care of by your grandparent, right?
Right.
Like safe care, what we know is safe for kids should be practiced regardless of what the provider is, right?
Yes.
And so I think that was like, to kind of some of the points in the chat earlier, like making sure families know, regardless of what type of care you're engaging in and why, when you're making these choices, for whatever reason you need to make these choices, how you can ensure that your care is safe.
Yes. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. And that's where we can use sort of, I mean, like I said, as a legal nerd, I adore a checklist. I adore a form. That's not always the best way to convey information, because sometimes you need that one-on-one. So we talked this morning about talking points and sort of some high-level training for people who can then access individuals directly and whose brains don't work like mine, right? I mean, English is my primary and first language, so therefore things that are written in English that are checklists and are in order make sense to me, but that may not make sense to everyone. So making sure we have resources. And then when we have those resources, then hopefully we can help folks make choices about safe care that make and receive information in a way that they can understand and make sense to them. I see comments. I'd like to see fines automatically issued on an individual's second cease and desist. If more fines were being issued and consistently, individuals would be less likely to provide care that's not allowed by statute. So that sort of focuses on the stick, right? So we could move on to the enforcement piece of our discussion. Are there tools that or information that could be available on standard operating procedures about enforcement that would be useful? Sorry, I just got something in my eye.
This is probably going to go more even the other working group where we're going to be looking at legislation and rules and statutes.
Yes.
Because right now, like the department does not have ability to enforce fines without going through the administrative court process. So, you know, it's that whole legal process before we can actually get to the fine piece of it. But there are other, like for instance, electrical and plumbing. I know they had did a statute change where they could actually go out and issue fines to programs for non-compliance. And then there's also some other programs in Denver that we work with that have that ability as well. So it doesn't have to go through that whole administrative court procedure.
Okay, that's helpful. That's helpful. What information would those of you who are not with the department, is there any information that you would like them to have or you would like to see in a standard operating procedure so that the department is aware of sort of, you know, this is really the nuance that we want you to be looking for, those of us who are providing legal and licensed care, you know, so that we want you to, this is what we see.
I was curious, and forgive me if this has already been clarified. If a complaint is filed, is there always an investigation, or do multiple complaints have to be filed before an investigation takes place?
No, we investigate every single complaint that we receive on unlicensed care, and unlicensed care. Actually, I should say, we investigate all complaints we receive on both licensed and unlicensed care. But yes, we go out on every unlicensed childcare complaint. And that is the one type of complaint that we actually take anonymously. We don't take anonymous complaints against licensed providers. We only take anonymous complaints against unlicensed providers, but we investigate everyone.
Thank you.
That's helpful. I think, and probably very reassuring for folks. I see a recommendation in the chat or a suggestion following up with those folks who make the complaint, assuming they're not anonymous. If you make an anonymous complaint, you're probably not going to get a follow-up. Would it be feasible to follow up with the person making the complaint to see if they have any additional information about how if care is continuing or not?
We will do that. We do take reporting party information, and if they would like a callback from our investigation, that's why we don't take anonymous complaints against licensed programs, because we actually, during our investigation, if things come up and we need to contact that reporting party again to gather more information, we will do that. Also, we will follow up with them if they request a follow-up once the investigation is complete.
So does a person reporting it actually have to request to be contacted back, or are they asked, would they like to be contacted back?
Yeah, they're asked when they take the complaint if they would like to be called back after the investigation, and then we will. Some don't want to be contacted, like they just want to make the complaint and be done with it. So we really do leave it up to the individual, but if they request a callback, we will follow up with them.
Because I've never been contacted back, and I've never been asked if I wanted to be contacted back when I've made a complaint. So that's why I was asking.
Yeah, they should be asking, or were you making unlicensed complaint?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's why I was trying to say, it's a little bit different on unlicensed. On the licensed providers, that's why we make sure that we have a reporting party. Most of our unlicensed complaints come in anonymously, and if it's a little bit different because, you know, how we treat the licensed complaints rather than the unlicensed. So that's probably why you haven't been asked. But if you, typically, they should be asking when you make a complaint against a licensed individual, they have to leave their reporting party information, and then we ask if they would like a follow-up.
Maybe that's one area going forward or at some point that we could include in the unlicensed complaint process is that folks would be asked, would you like a follow-up, assuming they leave their contact information.
If they would like to leave there, that's a good point, Laura.
That's great. Yeah, thank you. This is exactly the kind of dialogue that is useful, I think, at this stage, right? Is what additional, things can we add to this process? I would like to see more about legal unlicensed care as 4 in the home, total, not per adult in the home. There are a lot of unlicensed, and now we also know non-exempt providers that think they can have 8 kids unlicensed if they have 2 adults. That's an excellent point. It's an excellent point. Let's see. What coordination is currently in place? And again, if this is something we want to move to the next conversation so folks can prepare, that's fine. But I'd be interested to know, we've seen some folks in the chat reference, sort of child abuse, investigations with the county and things like that. And with law enforcement, we're going to have a conversation later today about involvement of law enforcement and how we can provide first responders with details about things to look for as they try and identify unsafe care. Is there current interaction between the departments and the different divisions? So if someone calls, I don't know, CCAP and they get the wrong person, is there coordination between the departments so that that information lands on the desk where it should? Or is that an opportunity for us to coordinate and provide SOPs for other departments and information for other departments? If you get this call, this is where it should go. Maybe that's more of a big picture question. We can kind of focus on that for the next time to see if there's that inter between departments, whichever one of those means between department communication. Could someone provide sort of we should also add that all parents should be told that their unlicensed provider was given a cease and desist order that day. How does that work if you're sending out a cease and desist letter? How are you able to contact parents if you don't have,
We aren't currently, I think that's the kind of confusing thing is all right now the department has authority to do is investigate whether illegal unlicensed care is occurring and then go down the process, the legal process, for fines or an injunction if they are. But we don't have access to like those families' information. Like we actually have no authority there. The department has no authority like to request files or ask to go in a home or any of that. So it's really us trying to determine whether they meet an exemption or need to have a license or not, right?
Yeah. Is there I wonder if there's an opportunity for posting, like if you could post something on the door, understanding full well that the provider could tear it down. We're not gonna keep, but if there's some sort of posting on site, and maybe this is a good time to talk about Ellie's bill. Sorry, Chelsea, did you have something?
Well, I know like when cars are towed, they put those stickers on your window that are like impossible to get off. So posting something like that might work.
Okay, we can look into whether that's legal or not, or if that would be
Yeah,
considered.
that might not be allowed.
Yeah, no, but these are, I think that whether we ultimately can do something is not something that I think we should use as a marker for brainstorming conversations, right? Let's get all of the brainstorms out there. I know someone talked about posting something in a yard. Let's look into it. Let's investigate and see. There might be a reason why we can't do it, but let's not assume. Could someone speak at all about Ellie's bill, or if not, we can provide a summary on that to everyone in the larger group meeting?
I could give like a brief kind of general overview.
Sorry, we're putting you on the spot a lot today, Karen. I appreciate it.
It's okay, no worries. So Allie's bill was a direct result of, we had illegal care occurring in an infant fatality, and Ellie Matthews is the infant that passed away. And so legislation was run this session that requires the department to post cease and desist orders, and in a consumer-friendly format, where it's apparent to parents and families coming, if they're searching for either licensed care, also that they can search to make sure they can find if their provider who is not licensed was served a cease and desist order. And so the department, we're actually going to be posting right now a spreadsheet that will show families if an individual, we've served them a cease and desist order, and if we've served multiples, that will be on there as well. We're actually building into our system, into Colorado Shines, where families search for licensed care. There will be a place where they can search for unlicensed, not search to see if their unlicensed childcare provider has been served a cease and desist order.
Yes.
So that's being built in a consumer-friendly format on our Colorado Shines website. But in the interim, we're actually going to be posting a spreadsheet where families can go until that system is up and running. And so the other thing that it did was it created stiffer penalties for those who do illegal care, that where we've went and we're going down that process. And so it has, stiffer fines and actually added jail time to individuals who continue to provide care that requires a license without a license. And so it kind of did two things: the posting and stricter enforcement.
Mama, I see your hand. I just want to ask one quick follow-up question for Karen. Do you know how far, or approximately how far back you're going for those cease and desist letters?
Yeah, we're going 3 years, which is essentially in compliance, the same with our Federal Child Care and Development Block Grant Act,
Okay.
which is how we post licensed providers 3 years of history. So we will be posting 3 years of history if we have a cease and desist order. Now, we keep all licensing history, all cease and desist information in our imaging system forever. We don't get rid of it. So we have the history for, as far back as but that's in our imaging system. So as far as a data pull and to post it, we'll be doing that for 3 years.
Okay, thank you. Alma, I see your hand.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, are you going to also post, say you're doing a surveillance, but they weren't given a cease and desist? Are you going to post possibly the surveillance addresses too, just in case if maybe they decide to end up going over the amount of legally that they're allowed to do unlicensed? Or is this just going to be if you give a cease and desist letter?
Legislation requires that we post it if they've been provided a cease and desist order. And I would like to Laura, if just for a second, because I want people to also think about this. Not everybody who provides care that should be licensed realizes that they're providing care that should be licensed. So I can tell you there are numerous times we receive a complaint, we'll go out to the individual and say, this is what the law requires. And they were like, I had two friends, I'm a stay-at-home mom. My two friends asked me to watch their kids, and I have 5 kids. Have no idea that they were providing illegal unlicensed care, right? So in that instance, they'll immediately like go down to the 4 kids or whatever. Like the majority of people we see actually comply with our, when we go out there and do the complaint investigation. So I don't want everybody to think like anybody and everybody is just ignoring orders and continuing to do care where we have to seek an injunction and fines and that. So I try to put it in the perspective of, individuals sometimes are just not informed. And once we inform them, they immediately comply with the law. So we don't want to necessarily like post every single person that's ever had an unlicensed complaint, because they may be trying to do the right thing and just not know.
Thank you for that. If someone wanted to do, some sort of an open records request, say I was looking at a particular provider, I search cease and desist, they're not on the cease and desist, and they're in this, exempt space or not. Can I do an open records request on a particular provider?
Yes, you can. So if we had an unlicensed complaint that was unfounded and we didn't serve a cease and desist, so current practice, we've been serving cease and desist every time we go out to inform them of the law. That practice is going to discontinue. We're going to give a flyer and pamphlet if we don't see any evidence of illegal unlicensed care occurring, and we're going to serve a cease and desist only when we do observe it. So that's going to be the process moving forward. But let's say you had a provider at an unfounded complaint, you could still ask us for that unfounded complaint, even though we didn't serve a cease and desist order.
Does that answer your question, Amber? If it doesn't, let us know.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, so we've talked about information that might be useful in identifying care that requires a license that is not currently licensed, and unsafe care. We've talked about the locations where care that is of concern is often advertised, the social media pieces. We've talked briefly, sort of overlapping with some other work groups, on some of the trusted advisors who might provide us with access. And we've talked a little bit about enforcement. We talked about the Ellie Matthews bill. That was sort of the total of the topics that I had at this particular standard operating procedure work group. If folks have other comments on that, I'll open up the floor just so if anyone has questions specifically about SOPs, we can visit about that. If not, then I'm happy to end that portion, and I'm happy to stay on the call if those of you who are here and want to talk about something else, we can do that. We have sort of an open forum tonight, and I think it's at 6 for folks who have hours, times in the day restrictions. But if anyone wants to sort of make a point that's outside of this, but I want to be respectful of people's time who just really wanted to focus on this one issue. So first I'll say, any other comments or questions about standard operating procedures? Going once, going twice. Sold. All right, then those of you who just logged in for that particular purpose are welcome to go. If anyone has additional questions, I'm happy to stay on to sort of facilitate that, or make sure that your questions or suggestions are included in this reports at this stage. Then speak up. If not, have a great afternoon. And I'll see some of you at 2. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey Laura, this is Kelsey Matthews.
Hi, Kelsey.